Just one word before we start with a new patient, or a couple of words. You know, what you see here projected is obviously your patient, or you, all of us. It's a human being in front of you. As you see, again, too, what he really wants to represent, what he will tell us, which is, of course, the mask, you know, the persona, as it's also called. On the other hand, right opposite to it, the personal unconscious, with several elements in there, the ones that we really truly are interested in, especially also the cyber delusion, the ailments from when they're too painful or too shameful, are really hidden in there. The obviously secondary delusions created because the first main problem posed by the core delusion is also not resolved, and absolutely will be reflected in the dreams that will be recurrent. Dreams are recurrent, and you must understand, dreams are the messenger of the personal unconscious. Dreams are recurrent only because your problem that has been posed by the unconscious has not been solved. That's why they recur. That's why they are so important. And as long as you have not resolved them, through introspection, psychoanalysis, and homeopathic therapy, that dream will come back and plague you. So you must understand that most of us, it was a perfect example yesterday, where we have two different patients. We have on one hand a very much taciturn, reserved, I wouldn't say introspective person, but that would be the wrong word, but certainly hiding. On the other hand, the second person was a lot more easy to deal with, was not afraid to really show more of the mask. I'm not saying right away of the shadow, but it's important for us to understand that we must also address those two patients in a different way. Because, as you could see, with some patients, I do not ask direct questions as much as you would like to hear it at that moment. Like you would say, why don't you ask me how he is feeling, how he is doing this, how he is that. Is to really approach the patient. There is no such universal approach. This is what is wrong. Okay? Every human being presents to you in a very different way. Okay, so it isn't like, I always ask my students when they do, how do you present yourself in a consultation? Oh, well, some would say, I start explaining them for 15 minutes what homeopathy stands for. Okay? And another would say right away, I really start on the psychological way, more of a feeling way. This is the wrong thing to do. What you see here is the four conscious functions of Jung, and we all have one. The moment we are 18 years old, we have one conscious function that is dominant. Men usually it's the thinking function. Women naturally it's the feeling function. The anima versus the animus, the sword versus the shield, the logos versus the eros, that's how we call it. Whatever you have as a dominant function, dominant conscious function, you actually need to put aside when you have your patient in front of you. If you're not going to do this, no matter how good of a job you do, the patient will actually not connect to you at all. In other words, if I have a thinking person in front of me, and I start right away with how you're feeling, which is, by the way, not called sensation. As you see, sensation is very different. Sensation has nothing to do with how are you feeling. Sensation is the touch. I feel this, therefore I have it. That's called sensation. It's the most rational of the four functions. When you ask how you're feeling, you actually appeal to the feeling function. Okay, not the sensation. You have the intuition as you see here, but so all of you have one dominant function. I know which ones are mine. And we have one secondary function. If you're a thinking person, you either have sensation or the intuition as a secondary function. But therefore, the feeling function will be the most archaic, the most primitive, which really means that, not that you don't have any feelings, but what it really means is that you approach the world and any situation in the world with your dominant function. It's normal, If I'm a thinking person, it's not like I'm going to approach the situation with my feeling function, which is absolutely not well developed, so to speak. Now you see, the trick is that when a patient comes, and he's a feeling patient, even if I'm a thinking person, I must actually just go by the way, shift over to my feeling function, even if it's not my strong point. I need to do it according to the patient. Yesterday is a perfect example, a very thinking person, very primitive feeling function. I cannot just start, whenever I ask about how do you feel, that's why I know right away in advance, he's not going to answer me. He's going to just hide it. He already was a hiding person. He is not going to answer to that at all. It would only slam the door closed. And that's the end of it. Or it becomes a hostile environment. I had really people working for me, other doctors working for me, and the patient would come back to me and say, I never want to go back to that doctor. And I say, why? Because actually he did the right job, and there was even a good reaction to the remedy. Yet they did not want to go back, because it's precisely of this. So there is no such thing. You really need to keep that in mind, that you really need to adjust, not to you. You can't impose your own dominant conscious function. If I have a phosphorus in front of me and I start explaining what homeopathy stands for 20 minutes, she's going to think this guy is crazy. It's not what I came for. If I have a sulfuric acid person coming to me and start thinking, well, you know, how was the relationship with your mother? That's my first question. He thinks, I want to go out of the door. Okay, that's not how it goes. There's no such thing. So keep this in mind. Even so, as we see the patient, we have to adjust ourselves. We don't know right away. But it's, you know, that's why studying psychology is a must for you. I repeat it again, the better psychologist you are, the better homeopathy will be. And then you will see there are very different ways of techniques of really going with the stream, as I call it, with the patient. I might not ask directly to him this, there is a reason for, as I explained to you yesterday. But I try to get back to it later, in an indirect way. And if it doesn't go then, I'll try again later. But there's no reason for it to push, okay? If you think that's what you need to do, you'll have a lot of things coming to you that's not going to go. Don't do it. So that's very important, I want you to know. I'm sure you're all used to some methods, whatever it's called. That's not the point. The point is that you have to have respect for the patient in the first place. The point is the patient comes to you and pays for you, and you are his servant. And that's what you should be. Anyway, we can get, so, let's, yeah?
Could you explain to me what you mean by sensation? I don't understand.
Oh, you don't? Okay. There is something which, so this, I would advise you to really read one of the psychological types of Jung, a wonderful book, where you can see, I can talk to you about 10 hours about this. But, you know, again, you see the sensation function. Sensation is basically, okay, I feel I'm existing. The touch, okay, it's just that. Has nothing to do with how do you feel. And you ask the question, how do you feel? You appeal to the emotion, to the feeling function, not to this function. What do you sense? You know, well, oh, this is soft, this is hard. Oh, I feel it, I have this, so I know it's existing. That's what a sensation is. Okay? Yeah, I feel it, this is existing. I have a nose. That's sensation. Okay? Intuition, as you see, is just the opposite. So when you have, if you have this a dominant function, then this is primitive. Always the opposing function is primitive and archaic. Okay? So you can be a thinking, intuitive person. Most likely you can definitely be a feeling, intuitive person. But you could be a thinking, sensation person. Not like a typical sulfur who's going to count his money just to see how much he has and then just counting it, you know, feeling it. I am this rich, okay? That's a typical sulfur trait, thinking, sensation. Count my saving looks, just looking at it, just a pleasure looking at it. Say, okay, and then put them away. Okay, so then you know, this is called thinking sensation. Okay, and that's how they will approach the world. We all approach the world or any situation in the world with our strongest function that speaks by itself, right? Why would we go with our archaic function? Just to give you an idea what our task is, all of us, the patient, but especially us, when we know these things, is to really become a more complete person. It also means that you have to function in your archaic function. You know, what better opportunity than being with the patient? You have that exercise every day. There is no way that every day you're going to have only thinking persons coming. In fact, probably not. You know, women are most likely, most naturally approaching the world with the feeling function. And if you're a male homeopath, you'll have plenty of opportunity to test your own archaic function and to see how well you're doing, how you connect to the patient. So we're all grateful to female patients, no doubt about it, for we as men, so we can practice, and vice versa for you women when you have a male patient. So that's the same thing. So see, keep this in mind, because you know it would be a pity, no, that you do all that hard work, you did excellent work, you found the remedy, the patient has even a wonderful, great reaction, then he doesn't want to come back to you. How incomprehensible can this be to you? Yet it's not incomprehensible. Right? This is a fault of our side, that we haven't seen this kind of thing. So just keep this in mind, that you understand, if you use a certain terminology, we should also understand what does that mean, no? If you use feeling, if you use intuition, we must understand, what does that mean? How does that present in the patient? Is there a positive and a negative aspect to it? And always there is, by the way, right? It's not everything positive. If you're too thinking, like a sepia, you see sepia here, right? So what is happening with sepia, as we saw yesterday, remember, perfect example. What happens, the natural feeling function of the woman, like yesterday in our patient, has been suppressed as a defense mechanism. So she becomes more the thinking businesswoman, now logos, where of course the animus dominates, which is, as Jung called it, he called it, but that's of course in the old times before female emancipation, he would actually say, you know, it's a regrettable incident that a woman has this thinking function. Okay, so for him, that wasn't really good for him. You know, it's a regrettable incident. I wouldn't say it that way severely at this point. But the natural function, dominant function of any woman is animal, of course, right? It's being a good mother, protective, nourishing, emotional nourishment. That's what mother stands for. So we expect somewhat from a woman, even if you're in the business circles, to not lose this feeling function, because it is your natural strength. And for us men, we need to exercise it. Okay, so we need to really become a more complete person. Never think, I have all 25%. That's just a delusion. You know, there's no such thing as perfection, okay? You're not that way. Nobody is that way. But for sure we know one dominant, you can figure it out for yourself. One, subdominant here, the secondary function. And especially look for that archaic function, because that's the one. If you want to become a better person, to become to really exercise, to be more introspective and look at your, look at your subconscious. And if you don't want to look at it, you probably get some nightmares. And if you keep on not listening to your dream and say that's just a dream, then you probably get a disease, an organic disease, a physical disease. That's typical. When nature calls you, you better listen. And nature is dreams. If you don't listen, you'll get punished with a physical disease. No doubt. Nature will visit you with a physical ailment. And that, of course, we see every day. Unfortunately. Even with ourselves, no? We must examine ourselves and say, why is this happening? And then we know that we can do better. We all can. So that's the whole point. Okay, that's enough. I'm going to do the patient now.